Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If I were to ask you guys which period of time would be the worst to live in Star Wars history, well, some of you might say the Clone Wars. The entire galaxy was at war, and the battles that defined this period were large and devastating. Or maybe you would say the Galactic Civil War period was the worst time to be alive. The Empire was in charge of most of the known galaxy, and they were going around with the Death Star and using it to destroy entire planets. Others might mention the legendary Yuzhang Vong War, which in my opinion was worse than the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War combined. Well, let's think about this. The Clone Wars was fought mainly between droids and clones. Most of the deep core worlds, aside from Coruscant, were also left untouched by the fighting. The Galactic Empire, as cruel and totalitarian as it was, for the most part, kept the galaxy stable and under control. And the Yuzhang Vong War, well, it lasted less than half a decade. Now, all of these conflicts are terrible and you probably wouldn't want to live through any of them, but there is one lesser known period of time in Star Wars history that could potentially be worse. It's known as the Draggulch Period, otherwise known as the New Republic Dark Ages. The Draggulch period represented a huge step backwards for the Republic in almost every way. Now, for thousands of years prior to this era, the Sith and Republic had been fighting endless wars against each other. The Sith Empire generally lost most of these prolonged campaigns. That was because they had less manpower, smaller territory, and infighting was also always an issue. The first Sith were actually originally Jedi who had been kicked out of the Order for wanting to pursue the dark side of the Force. Similar to people who actually want to lift weights but join Planet Fitness and then are banned for grunting when trying to hang clean. The Jedi and Planet Fitness are both afraid of what they do not truly understand. They are both organizations that pride themselves on focusing on self-improvement, but haven't truly taken a look at themselves through an objective lens. The point is, screw Planet Fitness, and although the Sith had a huge part to play in the downfall of the Republic, the Jedi were also equally as responsible. The Draggulch period unofficially started around 2000 BBY. I say unofficially because the Republic didn't fall overnight, it was more of a gradual decline. As a matter of fact, by 2000 BBY, things were going pretty well for the Republic. There had been a long period of peace that I would say rivals the peace after the Rusan Reformation. The last galaxy-wide war had been fought more than 1,000 years ago. It was known as the 17th Alsacan Conflict, and it was also known as the final Alsacan Conflict in galactic history. The Sith had not really been heard of much either since the Galactic War, when the Eternal Empire appeared out of nowhere and pretty much ended the conflict between the Galactic Republic and Sith Empire by defeating both organizations and then forcing them to be tributaries. A rebellion would eventually overthrow the Eternal Empire, and the Sith would kind of just fade away into the unknown region, and the Jedi were more than happy to let them. This was over 1,000 years ago as well. And so, just like we see before the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order of this period became complacent with their comfortable position in the galaxy. And within a few generations of stability, the Jedi were once again seen as invincible guardians of the peace. During this era, one Jedi Master by the name of Fannius would eventually leave the Jedi Order due to ideological reasons. The split was peaceful and both sides parted respectfully, and Fannius would be commemorated as the first of the Lost 20. But beneath all the charades, Fannius had much darker thoughts. The ex-Jedi Master was an Umbaran, after all, a sketchy alien species who came from a world covered in shadows. The Umbarans had a very strict, hierarchically structured society that rewarded successful risk-takers with promotion and riches. A failed attempt to ascend the ranks would eventually lead to terrible consequences, which would eventually lead to death. Had the Jedi Order seen my very detailed holovid on the strengths and weaknesses of the Umbarans, they probably would have known better than to recruit any. They're way too crafty and cunning to fall for the usual Jedi Code nonsense. Now, the real reason that Fannius left the Jedi Order was the real reason why most Jedi left the Order, and that was to pursue their curiosity of the dark side. The Jedi were extremely strict with the dark side, like dare strict. From a young age, Jedi would be bombarded by how terrible the dark side was and how it could corrupt you and destroy everything around you, but the Jedi never taught their students about Sith ideology and how the Order thought and manipulated people. The Jedi were taught that the dark side was evil, but they didn't necessarily understand why it was evil, which is kind of similar to what happened in Thailand, where people generally understand that Hitler and the Nazis were evil, but they don't really understand what he did, which is why it's so popular for young kids to wear Hitler pop culture mashup t-shirts to school. People need the truth, the entire truth, even the Jedi. And the Jedi Archives was full of Sith manuscripts, holocrons, and other documents that could have really educated the Jedi Order on how to combat this faction. But instead, they locked all of these documents away in their vault, and no one was allowed to see them. And so the Jedi painted a caricature of what the dark side was actually like and repeatedly pounded that image into the heads of their students. And so it was oftentimes the smarter and more independently minded Jedi that would try to pursue the dark side and figure out what it was for themselves, like Count Dooku, for instance. Unfortunately, these individuals found themselves unprepared for the true power of the dark side because of the Jedi's policy of censorship. You see, the dark side is a lot like meth. I mean, when you take it, it can give you extra strength and power. It's for this reason the average dark side force user was usually a better fighter than a light side user. But just like meth, the dark side will eventually turn against their users and damage their body, mind, and probably teeth. Had the Jedi Order been more open about the dark side and educated their followers better, Thanius might have never left. Thanius would disappear from the public eye and declare himself a Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Rune. Rune's first action was to unite the various Sith clans that were still hidden in the unknown region. Eventually, another 50 Jedi would leave the Jedi Order and join his new organization. There was nothing particularly special about Darth Rune's new Sith. They were pretty similar to other Sith movements throughout history. They quickly expanded their territory, attacked Republic forces, and were generally pretty successful at hunting down Jedi. But like most Sith, Darth Rune would eventually be assassinated by one of his followers, and that follower would also eventually get assassinated as well, and so on. Despite all of the constant infighting, the Sith would still continue to expand and rise to new heights during this period of time, known as the New Sith Wars. The New Sith Wars would span for 1,000 years and cover the entire Draggulch period, but it wasn't one long continuous war. Instead, it would be split into smaller conflicts. The Republic would fight the Sith would fight the Mandalorians, and the Republic would fight itself in the Senate. It was complete chaos. In the first few hundred years of the New Sith War after Darth Rune, being known as the Dark Underlord, would take command of the Sith assault on the Republic with his feared Black Knights at his side. He would actually be defeated in 1750 BBY by a joint Jedi-Mandalorian task force, which in itself was quite weird. The Mandalorians would continue to press the Sith Empire while the Republic focused on rebuilding its naval forces. By 1466 BBY, the Republic had gathered a massive fleet to destroy the new Sith. This leads to the Battle of Mizra, where a giant Jedi and Republic force confronts an equally large Sith force. During the battle, a Sith sniper manages to take out one of the main Jedi coordinators. Both the Sith and Jedi would use powerful Force users who were capable of battlefield meditation. Battlefield meditation helped connect your army into one being, making it more efficient and deadly. When the Jedi coordinator was shot, it caused distress amongst the Jedi Republic ranks, which eventually led to a rout. Over 500,000 people died in this one battle, and hundreds of Jedi were turned to the dark side. The Battle of Mizra signaled a new era for the New Sith Wars. The Republic had lost control of most of their Outer Rim territories as a result of the battle. And the light of civilization grew dimmer as the Republic retreated corewards, leaving entire colonies and swaths of territory to the Sith. This led to a collapse in the Republic's interstellar trade system and also their holonets. Without an efficient trade and communications network, the economy also began sliding downwards. To make matters even worse, the Kandorian Plague was striking Republic worlds, and it had a mortality rate of over 66%. The Jedi were basically the only functional organization left in the Republic, and they alone held everything together. Eventually, the Jedi would be forced to take larger roles in leadership, not only in the Republic military, but also in the central government. As a matter of fact, for the remainder of the New Sith War, every Supreme Chancellor of the Republic would be a Jedi. The one thing that saved the Jedi and the Republic from total annihilation was the fact that the Sith had conquered way too much territory already, and all of the various warlords in charge were already fighting over who controlled what. The damn meth heads had already lost sight of the larger picture. Some historians only label the last 100 years of the Draggulch Period the Dark Ages, simply because things got even worse, if that were possible. Now, while the Sith were kind of breaking apart into factionalism, the Jedi were also beginning to carve out their own personal fiefdoms. With a central government and military on both sides laying in ruins, individual Jedi would deploy themselves on the front lines with their followers and defend worlds from Sith incursions. Some of these Jedi became very successful and eventually even became the rulers for these small planets that they defended. This started the tradition of the Jedi Lord. These Jedi would essentially rule as monarchs over their newfound territory, a very strange concept for later generations of Jedi who were sworn not to be involved in politics, but such were the times. And it was a strange and challenging time. A lack of strong central government and infrastructure in the galaxy led to many worlds regressing into more primitive societies and losing a lot of their former technology. In the final decades of the new Sith War, the newly created Jedi Lords would create an army of light, which they would send against the Brotherhood of Darkness, the new faction of Sith in charge. This would eventually lead to the 7th Battle of Ruusan and the destruction of all the Sith. For there to be 1,000 years of peace, there needs to be 1,000 years of chaos, perhaps more, and that's what the Dark Ages of the Republic was. It was probably one of the worst times to be alive. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.